For centuries, humans have shared stories about dragons, enormous fire-breathing lizards that could blow their enemies to bits with a single blast of their hot, stinky breath. The only problem is that dragons don't exist, or at least they didn't exist until Disney's The Dragon, and The Dragon came out in 1981. Dragons are not real. But if dragons never existed, then where did the idea of such ferocious monsters come from? The answer may lie with some of our distant relatives. Here are just some of the prehistoric creatures that inspired modern mythology. Cave bear, also known as the grizzly bear. This large species of bear evolved during the late Pleistocene epoch in Europe, but it went extinct around 24,000 years ago. The cave bear was stockier than today's polar bears and brown bears, with shorter claws better suited for walking on all fours. Despite its large size, this bear was likely less muscular than its modern counterparts, so it probably spent more time looking for berries and other vegetation to eat than hunting. Some experts believe that these huge omnivores were the inspiration for the many stories and artwork depicting bear-like humanoids throughout Europe. These creatures usually wear armor made of thick hide and carry weapons like swords, shields, and even helmets. They look a lot like the large, brutish ogres depicted in Lord of the Rings. But this bear humanoid artwork predates Tolkien's books by thousands of years. So maybe the Lord of the Rings ogres were actually based on cave bears. Smilodon, also known as the saber-toothed cat. Smilodon fatalis is one of the most famous extinct prehistoric cats and is probably the largest of the 3 different species of saber-toothed cat. It lived in North and South America until 11,000 years ago and had distinctive long, curved saber-like teeth that it used to catch prey. Smilodons hunted mainly on the Great Plains and in temperate forests, where they likely ambushed unsuspecting prey. And because they had such long teeth, they most likely went after large mammals like bison, horses, and mastodons. The Smilodon has inspired many myths over the years, including modern depictions of the saber-toothed cat in movies like The Saber-Tooth. And considering that it lived alongside early humans in both North and South America, there's a chance that people living during the Ice Age had encounters with them. So maybe that's why many cultures have similar stories about dangerous predatory cats with extra long teeth. Basilosaurus, also known as the whale monster. Basilosaurus was an enormous predatory whale monster that grew up to 55 feet long and weighed around 33 tons. This giant creature had a crocodile-like skull and jaws filled with sharp teeth, and researchers believe that it was the apex predator of its day, meaning that it was at the top of the food chain in its environment. The Basilosaurus was a relatively new addition to Earth's ecosystem when it appeared around 40 million years ago. It remained the top predator for millions of years until the megalodon showed up and forced it to compete for resources. Because the Basilosaurus was so huge and scary, scientists think that it may have inspired stories about sea monsters like the kraken. There are even ancient Greek clay tablets that depict scenes of sailors fighting against a gigantic octopus-like creature. So who knows? Maybe there really is a giant sea monster out there waiting to attack any boat that comes too close. Woolly mammoth. Woolly mammoths were the giants of the Ice Age, and these massive tusked mammals were some of the last in a long line of extinct elephant relatives. They lived in northern Eurasia and North America until 10,000 years ago, and they adapted to cold environments by developing a thick coat of fur, short, sturdy legs, and humps to store fat. Their tusks could grow up to 16 feet across, and they used them for digging through snow, fighting other mammoths, and maybe even for moving large logs out of the way. Although woolly mammoths were once thought to be related to dinosaurs, they were actually more closely related to modern-day elephants. However, we know surprisingly little about them because despite the fact that they were some of the largest animals during the Ice Age, very few fossils have ever been found. This is probably because they lived in an area that didn't have many predators. So instead of being buried under rock slides or in tar pits, their bodies just lay on the ground and decomposed. Some scientists estimate that there were at least 10,000 woolly mammoths living in Siberia alone, and they lived so close to humans that they may have inspired many myths and legends. For example, mammoth bones have been found near ancient Native American settlements, and some Native American tribes tell stories of a giant hairy monster called the Sakakawea. The Sakakawea is described as having the head of a lion, the body of a bear, and huge fangs that drip with venom. Some believe that it was based on the woolly mammoth, while others argue that it was inspired by something much more terrifying, the short-faced bear. Short-faced bear. Short-faced bears were stocky, muscular creatures that stood up to 11 feet tall and weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. They were the largest land predators in North America for over 1 million years, and they lived in a variety of habitats, from coastal plains to forests to mountains. Their strong limbs and paws suggest that they were good climbers, and their skull was equipped with powerful jaws and huge teeth for crushing bones. Because they were so big and scary, some scientists think that they were the inspiration for stories about werewolves and other shape-shifting monsters. According to some Native American legends, the skin of a short-faced bear can transform anyone who wears it into a bear. And since the short-faced bear was one of the last in a long line of bear species to go extinct, it is possible that it continued to live on in stories for many years after it disappeared from the Fies. Eichel World. Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus was an enormous primate that resembled a giant gorilla or chimpanzee. It lived in southern and eastern Asia until 100,000 years ago and was perfectly adapted to life in warm climates. Its arms were longer than its legs, and it had a large sagittal crest on top of its skull. This creature weighed up to 550 pounds and stood over 7 feet tall when bipedally, which is roughly the same height as Shaquille O'Neal. Unfortunately, very few Gigantopithecus fossils have ever been found, which makes it hard for scientists to learn more about this strange animal. Because of this, we do not know exactly what it looked like. However, based on its size and skeletal structure, paleontologists have recreated what it might have looked like, and it wasn't exactly cute. With its massive arms and legs, long face, and protruding teeth, the Gigantopithecus definitely looks more monster than man. Some experts believe that this creature may have inspired stories about the legendary Yiran, a beast that resembles a bear-like ape covered in long dark hair. If true, this means that the Yiran may not be a mythological creature after all, but rather a member of the Hominidae family that simply chose violence and attacked anyone who got too close. Megalodon. Megalodon was an enormous shark that lived in oceans around the world until 3.6 million years ago. It was the largest fish to ever live and grew up to 75 feet long and weighed 100 tons. That's about the length of a double-decker bus and the weight of 33 African elephants. The megalodon had huge serrated teeth that it used to chomp through the bones of its prey, and scientists believe that it fed mainly on whales. It was one of the apex predators of its day, along with the Basilosaurus, and it ruled the seas for over 20 million years. Because the megalodon was so huge, terrifying, and ubiquitous, it's no surprise that it would inspire stories about sea monsters. In fact, some Japanese fishermen still tell tales of a giant shark-like monster called the Ryujin, which may be based on megalodons that washed ashore. Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is an extinct group of birds that lived during the late Jurassic period. The first Archaeopteryx fossil was discovered in southern Germany in 1861 and was named Archaeopteryx lithographica. These creatures were about the size of a condor, with long feathered wings and tails and a beak like a bird's. However, unlike modern birds, Archaeopteryx had teeth and claws on its wings. Scientists believe that the Archaeopteryx was one of the first animals to evolve from dinosaurs, and that it was directly related to birds living today. The strange appearance of the Archaeopteryx may have inspired stories about the griffin, a mythical creature with the head and wings of an eagle and the body of a lion. It's possible that early humans encountered fossils of Archaeopteryx and created legends about them. Or maybe they just imagined a creature that combined the fiercest parts of two separate animals. Macrauchenia. Macrauchenia was a mammal that lived in South America until 10,000 years ago and was related to horses and camels. It had a long neck and mouth, but unlike its modern relatives, it had 4 toes on each foot. The animal's skull was also unique in that it had no distinct teeth, but instead had a row of horny plates. Scientists think that these structures were used for defense since they resemble the armor worn by turtles and armadillos. The Macroshenia was fairly small, standing only about 4 feet tall at the shoulder, but its odd appearance may have inspired stories about the mythical Macha, a creature that has the head of a deer, the body of a horse, and the legs of a camel. So the next time you hear a story about a mythical creature, consider whether it could have been inspired by a prehistoric relative. Which prehistoric animal do you think inspired the most modern myths? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to stay tuned for more videos like these.